I just came from Malolos, which is around 45 kilometers away. And during my drive here, I used to remember that I actually went back and forth every day to UP Diliman to our house in Malolos. I used to come out around 8 o'clock in the morning. My class was around 10 o'clock. I will catch the bus. I will wait for a particular bus that will actually have a drop near Quezon Avenue. And at Quezon Avenue, I would have to take the jeepney and then ride down to the Palma Hall. I will actually select which particular stairwell that I would have to take so that I don't get to be late in my class. I usually get to be late because that drive is around 2 hours, and there were no FX then. It was all buses, it was all jeepneys. I think the story is all familiar with you because some of you are really from the provinces, and when you come here as medical students, as ordinary students or workers, you would actually have to ride one of those vehicles that I actually said. 40 kilometers one way, another 40 kilometers the other way. That's actually around 4 hours of my 24-hour life. Eventually, I realized that I was wasting around 1/10 of my year. That's around 1 month and a half of my year sitting in an FX, trying to make the best out of it, and trying to read, trying to do our homeworks, trying to program inside an FX in a very cramped place, depending on where you sit. You can sit in the middle, you can sit in the back. And the problem really is not doing things productively inside the vehicle, but trying to find out why do I really want to go from Malolos to UP Diliman and back and forth. At that time, I was just really thinking, well, it's my own place, it's my own bed, my cat is there, my parents are there, the food is free. But eventually, I have to give all that up because I was losing 1 month of my life. But transportation is not just about commuting. Transportation is about bringing not only people from one place to another, it's also bringing goods, bringing animals, bringing things that you would need at some point during your productive life. It's about moving humans, moving animals, and moving goods. So transportation is not just about the traffic that you would see every day. Transportation is about having the things that you would use to be there when you would need it. The problem is, it's not always working, as you would see with traffic. Sometimes the goods that you would have to use are not there. The patients that you would have to cure would have to travel from where they start and to your hospital. The people who would actually try to see entertainment, try to eat at restaurants, would have to get out of their homes and go to those places that they would want to do that. And most especially our workers. They would have to go out of their houses to go to the work that they would do so that they would have a productive life during the weekday, and on weekends they would try to find some recreation. Humans really want to travel around. They don't want to stay at one place. They want to walk. They want to go from one place to another. And the best way really is to do what I'm doing right now. We want to walk. We want to go around walking from our house. Even inside our house, we don't really stay at one room. Of course, we always want to see, we always want to be like the birds. And early in the century, heavier than air travel has been invented by the Wright brothers. Several years before that, there was balloon flight, and flying now has been so common that we also already have piece of airs, right? Rails. Just around outside your hall is a very, I think that's the newest rail transport system in the metro, several decades old already, and the MRT, the PNR, and what used to be the Manila-Dagupan Railroad were once the uh, lifeblood of Luzon, connecting the north and the south. Right now, of course, if you just look at the map of the Philippines, we are one big archipelago. We have several thousands of islands, and when you want to go from one island to another, before the piece of fares of the airlines, you actually have to go super ferry. You have to go your Roro. You have to take your small watercraft to go from one island to another. But most familiar to everybody is actually your road system. We travel with human-powered bikes. We travel with cars. We travel using taxis. Most of us have taken the jeepney. And this is where traffic is most familiar to everybody. But all of these vehicles, all of these ways to travel are actually part, not just only of transportation, but part of linking with each other. Of course, in the future, we want to do something else with what we were using right now, internal combustion engines. There are new discoveries in electric vehicles. My team in the National Institute of Physics is actually developing intelligent sensing for cars. We're trying to put LiDAR in cars so that we can sense if there's an obstruction there and therefore avoid some accidents happening. The other one, of course, is space. The Philippines now has its own satellite. There are scientists already from the Philippines doing research in Japan, trying to figure out the start of our space industry. Then, you have Elon Musk trying to have their Hyperloop alternatives. Hyperloop is essentially a pneumatic tube. It's a big empty corridor without any air, and therefore your vehicles can actually travel from one point to another without much friction because there's no air. But the problem really is that in planning transportation, most of our transportation planners will just look at what is there. And usually what is there is traffic. And the main point that they want to do is to reduce that congestion. In fact, the solution of most of our transport planners is not to decongest the city. The solution is actually to build more roads. In fact, I think they watched Kevin Costner, and they took this at heart in the Field of Dreams. If you will build it, they will come. And in fact, the problem is this. When you build roads, when you widen roads, you don't really get to reduce congestion. The best example there would be trying to get out of a tight belt by loosening it. You don't really solve the problem by loosening your belt. The way out of it is to reduce your weight, to reduce your obesity. But of course, this is exactly what economists call induced demand. If you have one of that product and you do more, or you make more, then people would actually use it more. Now, that's the same with roads. Roads, if you build more of it, the drivers will actually come. Samuel Schwartz, in his book Street Smart, actually wrote this down, and he has been a transportation planner for New York for several years. Now, Turner and Durandon actually found out that if you build 10% of roads, more roads in a city, then 10% for that same period of vehicular capacity will actually be used up as well. And therefore, driving would also increase by 10%. This one-to-one correspondence is exactly what we are saying in this slide. That if you build more roads, more drivers will come, and congestion will not be solved. In fact, even if you build public transport, so public transport, you would actually think that if you build one more LRT, one more MRT, or one more subway in Metro Manila, you would actually reduce the number of people on the road. But if you reduce those people, you will actually just replace those people who were using transit by new drivers because the roads are still there. The roads will still be used by new drivers. The reason for this is really all about people wanting to travel. If you expand people's ability to travel, then they will do it more. If you remember my story earlier, I lived around 40 kilometers away from Manila. And once the FX were there, it was so easy for me compared to taking a bus to go back and forth to Manila and back to Malolos. But the problem really is now when the congestion has started, and that's when I started thinking about my lost 12%. In fact, I took this just before I came. I think this is familiar for people coming from Quezon Avenue. They are actually building a new highway across Metro Manila, linking the north and the south Luzon Expressway. There are exits here, around 7 or 8 exit lanes around, along this route. I'm not sure if UERM will be part of it, but it's not just all about building more roads. It's all about questioning, do we really need these roads across Metro Manila? The other problem really is widening roads. If you were from Fairview and you lived there since your childhood, several decades ago, the Commonwealth Avenue is actually just 2 or 3 lanes. Now it's 8 lanes, enough for an airliner to actually land on it. But is that going to solve the problem of safety? Is that going to actually reduce congestion? From the previous points that I mentioned, increasing road widths would not actually solve congestion. You're just allowing more drivers to use these lanes. But on the question of road safety, increasing lane widths or adding more lanes will actually have a downward effect, especially with accidents. And it turned out that even if you narrow down the width of your roads, you actually get to reduce accidents by a measurable degree, or at least maintain the same accident rate as those with wider roads. Now, what is the effect of reducing road width? If you reduce road width, then you actually get to build other uses of those areas that you have taken away. For example, you can build biking lanes, you can build parking, you can actually build better pedestrian lanes for people who would want to walk, who would want to bike, or who would want to use this space in our cities. Now, it turns out also that even if you reduce the width of your roads, you don't actually get to reduce the capacity. It's counterintuitive to some that narrower streets would actually build the same capacity as wider streets. But it turns out with studies in the US and in the UK that if you reduce your width of your road, the capacity will still be at least the same. Now, the whole idea of this is really about trying to find out what is more useful for people. It's not about really just looking at one metric. One metric would be reducing congestion. But the other metric would also be travel time. The other metric would be probably what is useful for everybody, happiness in traveling from one point to another. The main point that I think transport engineers or planners would avoid is the fact that human behavior would be impacted by its environment change. And if you change the environment, like add roads, wider road size, then people will adjust. People will actually add and change their behavior according to what is presented to them. It's all about density and connectivity. My students actually do research in networks. And one of the things that we're trying to study is what is the most efficient way to go from one point to another in a network, just like a road system. And it turns out that if you have more connections, that's density of connections, or increased connectivity, more degrees of connections from one point to another, then your network will be more robust. Instead of having one line, for example, in LRT2, one point of error, one breakdown in the line will effectively shut down the line. But if you have alternative ways to go around or to adapt, then people will actually adapt to that change in your network. Now, that is where we go to multimodal and multinodal points. And that means that each terminal will bring you to other terminals. When I was going to Manila for the first time, my mother told me, you only have to remember how to go to two places, to Cubao and to Quiapo. Because in Cubao or in Quiapo, you can get any jeep all around Manila. And that's a multi-node and multi-node system. Multimodal system would be in Quiapo, we want to find jeeps, we want to find taxis, we want to find LRTs, and all the rest. That's what we meant. Of course, intelligent systems, you want to have intelligent systems in the sense that your network will actually adapt way before things will happen. And accessibility, of course, is another point where you want your multi-modes, your multi-nodes to be accessible by everybody. These are other things that you could think about in changing the public transport system in the Philippines and in the world. We want to have dynamic forecasting. My students are working on this. If I go out, for example, there in Aurora, I would want to actually project, will there be traffic in UP, and the rest. Electronic journey planners, this is being used in London. Last mile solutions, do you know what this is called in the Philippines? It's called tricycles and jeepneys. It brings you to your home. And we want to have, of course, a public cycling system, active traffic management by our managers, and of course, pedestrian planning. Here, the problem is pedestrians are second-class citizens. When you try to cross Aurora, you'll most probably get run by a jeep or a car rather than people stopping and letting you cross the street. Do we really need smart taxis? And of course, we also want vehicles like this to be enabled with technologies so that we can interconnect each other so that we would want to have an efficient transport of people, goods, and services. So transportation is not really just about moving things. It's not about moving you or me. It's about moving our lives. Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody.